Hello there, Ddraig back with a requested video this time on a particular mod. I had a few comments asking for this one, and see I've not played this before, I thought why not. So here's the unit guide for the Strigoi mod made by WhySoFurious. A modder I have covered before, as he did the Odo Draconis mod as well, so that's the link in the top right hand corner, and he's also been involved in the Regiments of Renown mods, which I have also covered. So who are the Strigoi? Well, they're the beast part of the vampires. Something which is part of all vampires. However, the Strigoi welcome this side and welcome the beast. To play this mod in a campaign, we need both the standard mixed unyoker and the unyocked version. So let's get on to the units, and this is a huge roster, so get your preferred beverage and let's take a look at the Strigoi. Let us begin with the Edgery Horde you start off with. The rest are unlocked through campaign with events. Prince Urshon was the younger brother of Nefrata, the first of the vampires. She took the elixir of life, but through spite she prevented Urshon from gaining immortality. Enraged by this, he took on himself to take this elixir for himself, and without the help of Nefrata, he became the beast that was the first Strigoi. As with all Strigoi, they are monsters in combat, fast over the ground and huge damage potential. While they may be not as graceful as your normal vampire, the sheer savagery of a Strigoi and speed means they are fearsome in combat. Urshon here is your typical Strigoi, low armour but high weapon strength, 300 AP and a bonus versus infantry of 30. With an armour sundering ability as well, they are not to be taken lightly in battle. Of course, they are also powerful wizards, with the familiar Spirit Yeech, Invocation of Nahek, Doom and Darkness, Soulblight and Gaze of Nagash. Urshon also has the ability to summon units of rats and also a unit of bats. Both are obviously very handy, and I particularly like the use of the bats as they're a great fast unit to interrupt missile units, which is always a bane of most of the undead factions. Along with Curse of Undeath, there is another ability to talk about, Yord of Masks, which can be really effective of sneaking your character into a key position and unleash on a poor hero who thinks he's nice and safe in the back line. Lastly, Urshon can be mounted on a Terrorgeist, adding a lot of mobility and giving a bonus of yards to 35, as well as keeping that infantry buff. The cheapest of the 4 Edgery Hordes is Varag, the first Ghoul King, who added everything living as well as the other vampires. He is unlocked when you build a tier 3 cemetery. With similar stats to Urshon, but with added ability of poison, but slightly less damage, with 290 IP and having a bonus of charge of 35. It is naturally still a force on the battlefield, but as I've just been over his stats, so let's move on to his spells and abilities, as all these are still the same as the previous Edgery Horde, but he does have a different ability, or in this case item, the Sword of the Ghoul King, allowing him to summon crypt ghouls and another summon to his bag of tricks. A quick unit of ghouls is very handy to have, especially as this uses no magic, but is limited to 2 summons. You can also be placed on top of a Terrorgeist. Nanosh is a bit different, as he's actually leader of a pirate band, so he works differently in the campaign, but we'll go into that in the next video. After his foes infiltrated a ship called the Untermung, and even though the then captain, Schroter, was warned about the Strigani, they were welcome aboard. Slowly, over many weeks, the food began to spoil, the crew mutinied, and they started to eat the crew one by one, until the servants of Nanosh were left. At this point, Nanosh raised from his crypt, which was deep in a dark place at the bottom of the ship. From then on, they now stay under Nanosh as pirates, raiding ports and eating captives. They are rightly feared, and even the pirates of Saratosa fear them. He is unlocked after building a tier 3 port at a place where T5 is available. Nanosh is the weaker of the Edgery Hordes, which we've talked about previously, slightly weaker in attack and leadership and weapon strength. While he only has 290 AP, but it has no other bonuses. He still has that poison, and is still more than a match for your average hero. Spells wise, he has 2 changes. Instead of Rat Spawn and Bat Storm, Nanush can summon a unit of zombie crew, and can also summon Ghoul's crew as well. Abilities: he has a unique Bloodlust to increase AP damage on a chosen target, great for nuking an enemy down quickly, and with a unique item called Open the Coffin to increase healing and add damage resistance as well as the hunger. This gives Nanush a lot of ways to heal back up and make him surprisingly durable in combat. Lastly, we have the High Priest, which is much more like a normal vampire lord. Armoured and with good defence, but not as powerful as the normal Strigoi. Best used as a support character, even though the High Priest can still dish out a lot of damage. With weak AP of 160, he's not going to do a whole lot of damage, and he's much slower than a Strigoi. And he's unlocked after conquering Galbraith. Magic-wise, he has the standard vampire lore spells, as well as some other abilities. First, we have a terrifying being, a constant hex around the High Priest, dropping stats in nice key areas. Then we have Shadow Blood, a magic missile which costs us no magic, which is always particularly handy, especially at that range of 250 meters. Then we have Summon Voidgeist. It's a unique summon, and not a unit you can recruit as far as I know. So here is the stats of it. High damage and 330 AP with bonus to the charge of 20. This is a formidable summon. It will of course degrade over time, but has really good defensive stats, and of course ethereal, making it hard to get rid of. A particularly handy thing to attack a cav force or a yard unit nearby, and is very handy if the enemy yard is mounted. Also, there was an item which is very good if you want to run a more ethereal based army, dropping the dark magic cost of both recruitment and upkeep. Lastly, the High Priest can be mounted on a horse or a chariot, which is definitely quite the unique mount, and maybe he borrowed one from the Tomb Kings nearby. But before we get started on the standard yards, a quick note about this army. As I go through each section, I'll say what of the more familiar units you have available for the Vampire Count's roster. I won't show them, as I'm sure you are quite familiar with these units. So the other Vampire Lord choices you have are the Master Necromancer, Vampire Lord, and Strigoi Ghoul King. The new Lords we can start with are the Strigana Garzakan. The Strigani are the nomadic people who worship the vampires as gods. However, they cannot prevent the butchering that happened by the Greenskins, and now the small nomadic people who wander the lands trying to stay alive. The Strigoi can still hire these units to give the faction a more hybrid human and undead flavour. The Strigani Karzakan is a combat lord who has survived the trials of combat, and they are named Children of Orshan. They are effective combat lords, being they are human, so don't have the potency of the undead, but are still very effective in combat, and much cheaper than any other lord. With 100 AP, but a nice anti-infantry bonus of 10, they can still do a bit of work in the fight, as their basic combat stats are pretty decent. With only one ability to talk about, but Chosen of Australian, which gives them a pretty decent boost in sustained combat, even though it does take a while to get to the final stages. The next Yord you can choose is Strigani Perchu. They are a particularly powerful mystic with an interesting use of spells, which we might as well go straight into, because their combat, like all human magic users, is very weak. His spell list is quite varied, so let's start off with the familiar. Earthblood to heal the non-undead units in the roster, Flock of Doom, Dance Macabre, and the Withering. Newer spells they have are the Bat Summon, which I've mentioned before, and Face of Death, a new type of wind spell which just burns the victims for a leadership debuff. Originz to hide their units and increase the speed by a quarter, which is very handy, as it has a 200 meter base range. Also, they can summon the ghouls like your standard Strigoi Yedrili Lords. Lastly, they can be mounted on a Plague Victim card, giving a nice leadership debuff, which gives this faction, and this Yord in particular, a lot of ways to debuff leadership. Also, they can be mounted on a Black Coach, giving some more buffs. The first is a heal around itself, and the next is quite a Yord friendly ability, adding more defense and attack around the wagon, which makes sense being a travelling faction. One new hero to talk about, but the Strigoi still have access to the Banshee, Necromancer, White King, Vampire Shadows and Vampire Death. The new unit is a Strigoi Mystic, a less potent magic user than the Pertru. Again, weak in combat, but an interesting spellbook. Earthblood, Flock of Doom, Pit of Shades, Withering and Dance Macabre, and Bat Swarm. We also have the Smoke ability as well, and they can also be mounted on a horse or prey cart. Now we can move on to the unit roster itself. For me infantry, you can raise the dead like any vampire faction and gives you the usual recruitment units. From the building tree, you can also recruit skeleton spearmen, cane waves, but you can't recruit graveguard. Okay, first unit is the Strigoi Thralls. Pretty much undead zombies, but with a more Strigoi feel. You know what you're getting here? You get your standard meat shield. This regimented round version of the Thralls was created when Grobach was attacked by Nagash, as his army was heading south to Blackfire Pass. On the way through this town, it was razed to the ground and the people turned into these Thralls. This is just a bit better unit of the Thralls and 200 of them to boot. This unit is unique to Nanosh, and as you see in my campaign overview, he has his own fleet like the Vampire Coast to recruit units. This serves as his skeleton wars like the Vampire Counts. Speaking of, you can also recruit the Spearman version, the Skeleton Crew Harpoons, which have the same stats and points value as the previously mentioned Skeleton Warriors and Skeleton Spearmen. A more unique unit now, Strigoi, coming at 400 points, and are much better than the standard Skeleton Warriors. Now, a word of warning, as I found this can be a bit confusing when it comes to healing, as running undead and humans in the same army means having 2 different heals. I have forgotten myself, so I found it easier to have a more themed army, mixing fewer undead units with the humans and vice versa. They do have an ability to talk about, Disengage, which is an interesting ability, giving the unit a boost in leadership and quite a large speed boost, so you can get away, get your leadership back up and then back in. Very handy if you have the ranks that support this behaviour, but can be quite micromanaging heavy. The Strigoi units have Vanguard as well, which is not actually that common for vampire counts, as they don't have many Vanguard units, which certainly adds a bit more, even more flavour to this faction. Another unique unit to the Nosh. This is pretty much your crypt ghouls, but have the aquatic trait. Useful on iron battles, which tend to have a lot of this terrain, which you can definitely use this ability and get around quickly on that particular map. For 500 points, and maybe 50 points more than your standard ghouls, you have this unit, which provides a lot of that extra 50 points. First, they are slightly quicker and do a bit more damage. They also have Vanguard and Stalk, which is perfect for a unit which is known as a good flank attacker. And if that was not enough, they have the ability Sewer Dweller to increase that speed even more, making them well worth that extra 50 cost. Originz of Renown now, Whaling Spectres of 550 points, finding a cheap ethereal unit and a magic attack, which is very handy at this price. As long as the opposition don't have any magical attacks, this unit can definitely do a lot of good work in the front line. Also, they have the ability Chilling Touch, reducing speed and melee defense as well, so this can provide just a thing to prevent the enemy running away when you fear them. A more damage dealing unit now, Strigoi Crew, again unique to Nanosh, with your melee defense but improved stats. They also have the ability called Taunt, an interesting hex which drops melee attack and speed strategy. Very good for evening the odds, as a 600 point unit needs a hex to try to even the odds because their low defensive stats means they can be run through quite quickly. Another Regiment of Renown, at 700 points, Survivors of Flintmire have improved stats over the standard Strigoi, notably in melee attack, defense and charge for up to +6 stats in these particular values. They also have the Unbreakable, making a pretty solid unit to have in the front line of an army. The Chanel Guard are Regiment of Renown Sewer Ghouls, which are such cost effective units. This version, at 740, adds a sudden armour instead of poison, and are much better at staying alive with superior melee defense. They are slower and don't have the Vanguard or Stalk, so at nearly 200 points more, they're not as flexible. They do have the ability to Strigoi your tenants, adding leadership and melee defense around them, but only to other undead units, so always remember what I said before about mixing the living and the undead. At the 750 cost, we have Voyneck, Swordsman and Spears. Both are cheaper than Graveguard and perform a similar niche. Heavy armoured without silver shield, and both have good defensive stats, which are a bit superior to the Graveguard, especially in the Spearman case. Spearmen have 20 AP and 19 against charge, so good damage dealing here, whereas the Swordsmen have only 12 AP and a bonus of infantry of 8. Both are good at grindy fights, and especially good if you keep them buffed. The Strigoi Daimyo are similar to the Empire Greatswords. They're not as well trained, so the melee attack is a bit yes, and the armour is nowhere near the Greatsword level. But they are cheaper at 800 compared to 900 of Greatswords. AP of 23 and anti-infantry of 8, they can provide a bit more punch as needed. But the Octa units to do this type of thing, and most of them are monsters. They do have a great ability, applying more leadership and sustained weapon damage, and the Unbreakable for 15 seconds, so it can be used again after the cooldown. A very good ability and can really help with the front line that is faltering, and allows you to get the upper hand on the enemy. The defenders of the capital of the Strigoi civilization, these were the Chosen Guardians, a very powerful unit with a lot of damage and decent armour. Great attack unit at 850 points and provide 10 AP with 9 bonus infantry, making them excellent for quick charges to add some more DPS. While they can knock your arse in a prolonged fight, especially against higher AP units, they can hold very well against chaff. Similar to the Strigani Daimyo, these are the undead version and are more expensive at 950 points. I carry 150 points more than the Strigani ones. Also, those are the superior fighters to these. These have much better armour at plus 40 more, and their damage is superior at 29 AP and 30 bonus to infantry. However, there's a noticeable difference between the martial skills. These will hit a lot harder, so buff them with a Dance Macabre so that they can really cut through the opposition, even the higher tier units. Lastly, we have this Regiment Renown. With very high melee defense, regen and a decent attacking values as well, with 12 AP and a bonus infantry of 8, making the Strigoi infantry line interesting with so much variation compared to your standard vampire counts, allowing you to mix a little bit of humans and undead together. Before we get completely away from the infantry side, here's the only unit of missile infantry. Due to the hybrid nature of this faction, you do have a small bit of missile play, but only from close range. With AP of 13 and 3 shots per volley, this unit can do some nice work. Use as you would a 3 company militia, but set them up to get a good nice volley off into the enemy either on the flank or when they are charged. This allows you to have a small missile presence on the battlefield, and we have one more option which will be further down this list. Much like the vampire cults, there's not much enemy options for this faction with cavalry, and they also don't have the blood knights. But we do have a hex wraiths. First choice is nice and cheap at 500 for Strigani nomads, a basic cavalry at that price. They are okay and not have bad damage, and they also have a shield. While the obvious comparison will be with dire wolves, which are much quicker and have greater numbers, but this unit is much better in a fight. It all depends where you value on speed or the better stats. I've always valued speed, as the dire wolves are so fast, but they can definitely be an option for any Strigoni based army. The next unit is pretty much the Black Knights, as their stats are pretty much identical, apart from this unit has 2 more points in the melee attack over that unit. Also, they are cheaper at 700, which is strange, but they are a good cavalry force and are 200 points more than the previous unit, definitely giving you a bit more boost in combat stats for that price point. This is a mirror of the Black Knights Janssen boarding unit you will find in the Vampire Counts roster, but it's slightly more expensive at 1100 points, but again, provides that same high impact unit. There's also Originz version, Farnick's own, which again is the same price as the Regiment of Renown you can find with accounts. The last of the Cav forces, we have a mist unit, which is definitely worth talking about. A low unit count of 48, but a huge amount of damage on the blunderbuss. 6 projectiles per shot, so get them range and yet rip, and they can even fire when moving, which may be a bit overpowered, but I presume that is the reason for a drop in model count. The best comparison is the grenade launcher from the Empire, but this does even more damage, but of course it's not as explosive. A great fast manoeuvre unit, and I usually have 2 of these in most armies, because they're so much fun to use, and they can yaff Every every time you get a weird charge, as they launch a volley straight into the back of units as they come in. In the Monsters and Beasts section, we can expand the amount of options yet again. Nanush can actually recruit Mongols, and all the other monsters, which are available to vampire counts, are available to you as well. So the first new one is of course the Strigoi mob. You knew it was going to come here, and this is a brilliant unit. More expensive than Crypt Horrors at 900, compared to 800 for that particular unit. They're superior in pretty much all ways, with Vanguard, Stork, and a large AP value of 45, and anti-infantry of 20, making them one of my favourite units in the roster. Huge damage possibilities, and with that Stork, the enemy won't know what hit them. With decent speed as well, they're born flank attackers, and they can be left on the side of your army to charge in when the need arises. You can keep your Crypt Horrors in the second rank of your army to add a bit more punch, and then use these to deliver that final blow. A truly devastating unit, just watch out for that yo armour. As an alternative, we have the anti-arch version. Similar stats again, but obviously more focused on taking bigger things down. No Stork and Vanguard this time. This is a unit to keep in your ranks if you know you're facing the monsters of the Warhammer world. For a huge 68 AP and anti-arch bonus of 25, they can definitely do a lot of work. At that poison, they can actually reduce the damage coming back at them, as their surviving is pretty good as the defense is high. Cavalry, however, can cut through this unit due to their superior numbers, so be aware of that. They also have a bonus to their damage when in melee. Use it to add more damage and leadership, but at the cost of their defense, which can be very bad if you use it at the wrong time. Personally, I prefer the mob version, but there's not a lot of dedicated anti-arch units in this roster, so having one available is very useful. A Regiment of Renown of the Arch unit, and a particularly scary one as it has a huge combat stats increase, and with that huge melee defense as well, make it particularly tanky, even if the army is still weak. Add a hero or two, and this unit can definitely take down some very scary single entity monsters. But you do pay for this at 1375, which is a large jump over 925 for a standard unit. But if you're going monster hunting, next to this, the Terrorgeist is your best option against the large units. The last of the monsters is the Regiment of Renown Strigoi, a formidable Terrorgeist with magic and poison. At 2630, it is the most expensive unit in the roster, and I'm not convinced it is needed. While it's definitely powerful, it's 580 points more than your standard Terrorgeist, and only has a few notable buffs, even though the defense is vastly superior. I just don't think it's worth the cost, even though it's a very cool unit to have. Lastly, we have the various corpse carts, or in the Strigoi case, plague victims. All the stats and the costs are the same as well as the buffs. And there's also a black coach or a Strigani wagon, which again has the same buffs. This faction does not have the mortgage engine, so that is the complete roster. A really interesting list with a lot of variations possible for your army. So with that marathon is done, thanks for watching, and the campaign will be in my next video, and I hope to see you there.